The air was thick with the scent of night, moist earth, the sharp tang of pine, and something else. Something electric. Aria stood in the shadow of the grand Wintercrest estate, her heart thudding so loudly she feared the wolves would hear it. The blood moon hung heavy above, bathing the grounds in an eerie red glow, and the crowd of highborn wolves inside the ballroom didn't know she was here. She wasn't supposed to be here. But tonight, of all nights, she had to be. Beneath the velvet dress, frayed and borrowed, Aria's pulse quickened as she caught a fleeting glimpse of him, Rylan Thornhart, the alpha heir, the very wolf who would decide her fate before dawn. She didn't belong in his world. He was everything she wasn't, powerful, fierce, untouchable. She was an omega, a nobody orphan in a kingdom that didn't care. But tonight, the moon had decided otherwise. She wasn't sure what she was expecting. Maybe a flash of recognition, a spark of interest from the alphas and betas around her. Instead, she was invisible, an unspoken presence drifting through the edges of the gala. But Rylan, he felt like a storm approaching, his steps heavy with purpose. His dark eyes locked on hers, and it felt like the world paused for a heartbeat. He was here. In front of her. His gaze pinned her to the spot, and she forgot to breathe. Before she could even react, he crossed the room in strides that didn't seem to touch the ground. People stepped aside, his path clearing like the sea for a conquering king. The air shimmered with the weight of his presence. Without a word, he reached her, his fingers grazing her arm, sending a bolt of heat straight to her core. The room held its breath. Aria couldn't tear her gaze from his eyes, dark like the night itself, as he guided her toward the ceremonial circle. No words, no hesitation. Just instinct. Her heart pounded in her chest, too fast, too loud. She tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but her voice caught in her throat. Before she could blink, Rylan was pulling her close, his breath hot against her ear. She shivered. His lips brushed the curve of her neck, his presence enveloping her in a way that made the entire world fall away. Then, without warning, he sank his teeth into her skin, right there, in front of the watching crowd. The pain was sharp, but fleeting, followed by a heat that spread like wildfire beneath her skin. The bond, it was real. She could feel it. The mark, burning, alive. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. She felt alive. But that feeling, sweet, pure, intoxicating, lasted only until the first light of dawn. The moon had barely disappeared behind the horizon when Aria awoke, her body trembling, the soft warmth of Rylan's embrace fading from her skin. The mark still pulsed beneath her flesh, but there was no trace of him beside her. No sign of the heat, the fire they'd shared. She sat up, panic rising in her chest like a tide she couldn't stop. Where was he? The room was empty. Aria scrambled to her feet, her breath shallow. Her hands trembled as she touched the delicate mark on her neck. It burned, but not in the same way it had the night before. Now, it felt like a cruel reminder, one that told her she was still alone. She rushed to the war room, the same place she had seen him last. She needed to find him. He had to remember. He had to know what they had shared, what they had become. The bond wasn't just a mark, not just an instinct. It was something deeper. Something faded. When she found him, Rylan was standing by the large oak table, the moonlight still casting a faint glow through the tall windows. He didn't turn when she entered. His back was straight, his posture rigid. But there was something off. A disconnect in the way he held himself. "Who are you?" His voice was flat, distant. It felt like a slap. Her heart shattered. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped closer. "Rylan, it's me. Aria. We." He turned to face her then, his eyes searching hers with no hint of recognition. He looked at her like she was a stranger. "What are you doing here?" No, you marked me. Last night. The blood moon, Rylan, we." But his gaze was empty. There was nothing. No flicker of the connection they had shared. Her chest tightened. "You don't remember me?" Her voice barely reached above a whisper. It felt like the world had tilted off its axis. "I don't even know who you are," Rylan said, his voice cold as steel. "I don't know why you're here, but you need to leave." Aria staggered back, the weight of his words suffocating her. The bond she had felt, the promise of something eternal, vanished, as though it had never been. As she was dragged away by the guards, her heart cracked into pieces. She screamed, "Ask your wolf." Her words echoed through the halls, but Rylan didn't move. He didn't respond. It was as if she had never existed. But she couldn't let go. She couldn't forget him, not when the mark burned so fiercely beneath her skin. And even though the council banished her, exiled her to the wilderness, a small voice inside her knew that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The years passed. Winter after winter, the seasons turned as Aria buried herself in the land she had come to call home. Alone, broken, and carrying a mark that nobody could see, she learned to survive. The bond never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, aching and pulsing, reminding her of everything she had lost. But Aria had never been one to sit idly by. She honed her skills, became a healer, and carved out a place for herself in the borderlands, just outside the reach of Wintercrest. She had no other choice. She couldn't stay in a world that had forgotten her. Then came the rumors. Rylan was changing. His strength was faltering. His wolf, once a terrifying force, was growing restless. His emotions swung wildly. He stopped shifting altogether. Whispers spread through the pack that something was wrong. That something had broken inside him. But no one knew what it was. Aria did. The bond between them wasn't just a mark. It was a soul-deep connection, and something had torn it apart. Rylan's wolf was unstable because it had lost its other half, her. And so, when the call came, when the warriors found him, bloodied and broken in the woods, it was Aria who was called to save him. Her hands trembled as she stepped into the cabin, her heart pounding in her chest. He lay on the table, barely breathing. She could see the blood staining his clothes, the way his body seemed to be fighting against the very nature of his existence. The curse that had been placed on him years ago was taking its toll. When he opened his eyes, the fog of confusion was still there. "Do I know you?" His voice was cracked, fragile, like the remnants of someone who had long been lost. "You did," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Once. When you still had a heart." But even as she spoke, Aria knew that the road ahead was far from simple. She would have to face the curse that had been placed on Rylan, the very thing that had caused him to forget her. And she would have to decide whether to trust him again, to give him another chance. The bond between them had never truly disappeared. But could she survive the pain of losing him again? Or would the curse finally break them both? As she touched his hand, the answer seemed to lie just beyond reach. The bond burned once more, and with it, 1,000 unspoken words. Aria's breath caught in her throat as Rylan's eyes flickered open, their cerulean depth clouded with confusion. The room was dim, save for the faint light of the lantern on the table, casting shadows over his bruised face. She had never thought she'd see him like this, broken, his body so vulnerable it made her ache. But the moment his eyes met hers, something twisted inside her chest. That bond, still there, raw and undeniable, pulsed between them like a heartbeat, thrumming through her skin. But the man in front of her, the alpha, the warrior who had marked her, he didn't recognize her. He barely seemed to remember what had happened the night of the blood moon. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to look at her as if she were just another stranger. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain still. There was no room for hesitation, no time for weakness. She was here to save him. To heal him. "Do I know you?" His voice was hoarse, the words broken, as though they had struggled to leave his lips. Aria's heart splintered. He had no idea who she was. No idea what they had shared. The bond they had formed, their souls intertwined under the light of the blood moon, meant nothing to him now. And yet, it meant everything to her. "You did," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor, her words steeped in the pain of what was lost. "Once. When you still had a heart." Her fingers hovered over his skin, torn between the instinct to heal and the terror of being forgotten again. She needed him to remember. She needed him to feel what she felt. But the reality was brutal. The alpha who had once chosen her, the man who had marked her as his, was a stranger now, and his wolf, that part of him that should have recognized her, was silent. Rylan closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. There was something in the way he breathed, the tension in his muscles, that told Aria he was fighting against something. Something deep inside him that wasn't just physical. His wolf was restless, unsettled, as though it could sense what was missing. And maybe it did. Maybe the wolf inside of him could still remember, even if his human side had been stripped of the memory. Aria's hand trembled as she moved it closer to his chest, brushing his skin lightly, as though testing the waters. The contact was like a spark, lighting a fire inside her that she didn't know how to extinguish. She needed to pull away, to distance herself from the pain, but she couldn't. Not now. Not when the bond flared beneath her skin, pulling her toward him like a magnet. "What happened to you?" she asked softly, her voice a whisper of the past. "Why is your wolf so broken?" Rylan's eyes flickered open again, and this time, there was something deeper in them. Something that hinted at recognition. A flicker of memory, a spark of understanding. "I don't know," he murmured, the words heavy with frustration. "Something's wrong with me. I feel lost. Like I've been torn in half." Aria's breath hitched. "That's because you have been," she said, her words carrying the weight of truth. "Rylan, there's a curse on you. A spell. It's not just your wolf, it's your soul. You're incomplete." And she swallowed hard, fighting the swell of emotion rising in her throat. "I was the other half. The one your soul needs." He stared at her, confusion still clouding his features. "A curse?" he repeated, as though testing the word. "I don't understand. Why can't I remember you?" The question hung in the air, unspoken answers filling the room. But there was no easy explanation. Not yet. The truth of what had happened to them, the magic that had torn them apart, was still a mystery. She couldn't give him all the answers. She could only tell him what she knew. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking as she fought to keep her composure. "But I do know one thing, your wolf remembers me. I remember you." She met his gaze then, the rawness of her words sinking deep between them. The bond pulsed again, like a heartbeat in the silence. For a moment, neither of them moved, the weight of the past settling between them like an invisible storm. But then, as if something inside him shifted, Rylan sat up with a suddenness that caught her off guard. His hand reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed the mark on her neck, the same mark that had burnt her skin the night they had been bound together under the blood moon. The mark that was now the only proof of the bond they had once shared. The only proof that he had chosen her. "You're not lying," he murmured, his voice thick with disbelief. "I can feel it. The bond. It's still here." But, he paused, as though searching for the words. "Why can't I remember?" Her heart wrenched as she watched him struggle with the truth, the confusion and regret written all over his face. "Because someone who wanted to destroy you, cast a spell on you," Aria explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was meant to tear you apart. To make you forget. But I've never forgotten you. And your wolf," she hesitated, unsure if she should say it aloud. "Your wolf never let me go." For a long moment, the room was silent. The air between them crackled with tension as Rylan's gaze moved from the mark on her neck to her eyes. And then, something in his expression softened, the hardness in his features melting away as he seemed to finally understand. "Aria," he whispered, her name falling from his lips like a prayer. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to forget you. I never wanted to." She could hear the pain in his voice, and it broke something inside her. She had wanted to hate him for what had happened. To be angry that he had forgotten her, that he had left her to suffer while he moved on with his life. But hearing the sorrow in his words, the genuine remorse in his voice, made it impossible to stay angry. "I know," she said quietly, her hand reaching out to gently grasp his. "I know you didn't. But we have to fix this. We have to figure out how to break the curse." Rylan's fingers tightened around hers, and for the first time Aria felt something inside her shift. The tension that had gripped her chest began to loosen, and she allowed herself to lean into him, the weight of the years between them lifting ever so slightly. She had never stopped caring about him. Even when he had forgotten her, even when the world had told her to move on, she hadn't. But now, she could feel the possibility of something real between them. A chance at healing, at rebuilding the bond that had been torn apart. But that healing wouldn't come easily. She knew that. The curse was still there, a shadow hanging over them both, and it was far from over. But in that moment, as Rylan's hand held hers, the bond pulsed again, stronger than before, and for the first time since that fateful night under the blood moon, Aria allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. "What if I forget you again?" Rylan's voice was barely above a whisper, his gaze uncertain. Aria's heart tightened in her chest, but she didn't pull away. "Then I'll remind you," she said firmly, her voice steady. "And when you remember, I'll be here. No matter what." His eyes searched hers, and for a moment, the silence between them felt like a promise, unspoken, but they're all the same. Then, without a word, he leaned forward, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like they were both unsure of where they stood. But as the bond flared between them, as the memory of everything they had shared rushed back like a tidal wave, the kiss deepened. The world seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them, their souls finally coming back together. But even as the kiss consumed them, a shadow lingered in the distance. The curse had not been broken. And no matter how much they wanted to believe in their love, the world they had once known was not done with them yet. Aria could feel it, the danger, the weight of everything that had come before. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The question still hung in the air, unanswered, lingering like a storm waiting to break. Could they truly defeat the curse that had torn them apart? Or would fate find a way to separate them once more? For now, though, all Aria could do was hold on. And hope. Rylan's eyes burned with an intensity that felt like it could tear the very air around them, but the unease in his gaze was undeniable. His body, once so sure, so unwavering, seemed caught in a storm he couldn't navigate. Aria stood before him, the scent of her presence wrapping around him like a fog, an invitation he could neither fully accept nor reject. The moonlight that filtered through the cabin's window seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their hearts, setting the atmosphere thick with unspoken words, promises of things that could be, and things that might never be. "I still don't understand," Rylan finally spoke, his voice strained, as though he were unraveling a mystery he was desperate to solve. "Why can't I remember you the way I should? Why does everything about you feel familiar, but so far away?" Aria felt the ache of that question deep within her. It was a question she had asked herself 1,000 times. She had spent years alone, the memory of his touch the only thing keeping her alive, yet the very thing that threatened to consume her. She had held on to him when he didn't remember, when the bond burned through her skin, a constant reminder of what had been stolen. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling despite herself. "But I feel it too. Every time I look at you, it's like my soul remembers something I can't touch, like I'm losing something I've never had." Rylan's gaze softened, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might finally see her. See them. The truth. But then his eyes flickered, a shadow crossing them, and he turned away. The movement was sharp, almost defensive, and she felt the air between them stretch, a chasm she hadn't realized existed until that very moment. "You've waited for me," he said, his back to her, his voice thick with something she couldn't name. "I can see it in your eyes. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to remember." Aria took a step forward, the ground beneath her feet solid, but the space between them felt like an ocean. She could hear her heart in her ears, drowning out everything but the sound of his confusion. "Rylan," she said, each syllable breaking against the weight of the moment. "It's not just you who's broken. It's both of us. You've been cursed, but so have I. You don't remember me, but I've carried you inside me every day. I've carried the mark of your love, the mark of your soul." He didn't turn, didn't meet her eyes. Instead, his fingers tightened around the edge of the table, his knuckles white, the tension in his body unbearable. "I don't know how to be the man I was," he said quietly. "I don't know how to be the alpha I should be. I can't even remember the last time I felt whole. And now you're here, and I don't know how to fix any of it." There it was. The truth she had feared to hear, the one she had known deep down. He was broken. His wolf, his soul, was fractured, and she had been walking through a fog, trying to find her way back to something she wasn't even sure existed anymore. But the bond, the mark, it still burned between them. And for all the pain and uncertainty that loomed, there was a flicker of something stronger than either of them. Something primal, something that neither of them could deny. Aria reached out, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. The contact was electric. She felt it shoot up her arm, straight into her heart. Her pulse raced as she stepped closer, until the air between them felt so thin it could shatter with the slightest movement. I don't need you to remember me perfectly, she whispered, the words coming out before she could stop them. I just need you to remember that you once chose me. That I am yours. Her voice trembled on the last word, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. She needed him to hear her. Needed him to understand. The silence stretched between them, thick and unyielding, but then, slowly, he turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, his eyes shadowed with something she couldn't place. Tell me, he said, his voice rough, raw. How do we fix this? How do we make it right? The question hung in the air like a fragile thread, the weight of it pulling at her chest. She had no answers. No magic words that could undo the curse, could repair the fracture in their bond. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to give up on them. Not now, not when she felt the pull of his soul, of their souls, calling out to her. You're not alone in this, Aria said, her words steady now, carrying the conviction she had spent years hiding. I'm here. We'll figure this out together. Rylan's eyes softened for a moment, and then he stepped forward, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. You've always been here, he murmured, his thumb brushing over the curve of her cheek. I don't know how to thank you for that. How to make it right. Aria's heart swelled with the ache of everything that had been and everything they could still be. Don't thank me, she said, her voice soft, steady. Just, let me in. Let me help you. The words felt like a promise, something they both needed to hold on to. But even as she spoke them, she knew it wouldn't be easy. They had years of pain and separation between them, years of uncertainty that couldn't be erased with a touch or a whispered promise. But it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Aria believed that maybe they could find their way back. That night, they lay beside each other, the silence thick with the weight of what had been and what was still to come. Aria tried to rest, tried to quiet the storm inside her, but sleep eluded her. Her thoughts spun in circles, the memories of their time together, the loss, the yearning. She could feel Rylan's presence beside her, the heat of his body, the tension still lingering in his muscles. But there was something else, too, a quiet desperation that mirrored her own. And when she closed her eyes, she saw him, saw the image of the man who had once marked her. The man who had once been hers. But now? Now he was broken, and so was she. She couldn't help the tears that slipped down her cheeks, the soft sobs that racked her body. She tried to stifle them, but they came, unstoppable, a flood of grief she couldn't push away. And then, to her surprise, Rylan's arms were around her, pulling her close, holding her like she was the only thing that mattered. Don't cry, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm here. We'll fix this. Aria buried her face in his chest, the warmth of his embrace a comfort and a torment all at once. He didn't remember her completely. He didn't remember the bond they shared. But in that moment, it didn't matter. She knew that she had to keep fighting, for both of them. The next day, they set out together. The forest was silent as they walked, the only sounds the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the distant calls of birds. But there was a tension between them, an undercurrent that neither of them could ignore. The bond was still there, still pulsing beneath their skin, but it was fractured, broken in places. And neither of them knew how to fix it. They were searching for answers, anything that could break the curse that held Rylan's memory hostage. But as the days passed, the darkness of the curse seemed to grow heavier, its shadow falling over them, choking the hope that they had once held. And then, as they walked deeper into the woods one night, a figure appeared in front of them, tall, cloaked in shadow, its presence cold and menacing. "Do you think you can escape the curse?" the figure said, its voice low, like the wind through the trees. Aria froze. The figure's voice was familiar, and in that instant, her blood ran cold. She recognized the magic. The curse. It was the same one that had torn them apart. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You did this." The figure's laugh was dark, echoing in the stillness of the woods. "You should have stayed away, Aria. But now, it's too late. You've brought him back into the fold." Rylan stepped forward, his body tense. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure took a step forward, and the moonlight revealed a face, familiar, but twisted, like a memory she couldn't place. The figure was a wolf, but not just any wolf. This one carried the stench of magic, of dark sorcery. And it was here to finish what had been started. As it raised its hand, ready to strike, Aria realized the truth. The curse wasn't done with them yet. And this was only the beginning. "Run," she whispered, the words escaping her before she could stop them. But it was too late. The figure lunged. And in that moment, everything changed. The moon hung like a blood-red omen in the sky, casting its eerie light across the land. The air between them still crackled, charged with everything unspoken, yet everything had shifted. Aria felt it the moment Rylan's arms had wrapped around her, holding her as if he were afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. The kiss they had shared, desperate and full of longing, had lit a fire between them, and now they stood in the silent aftermath, trying to find their way back to something that felt real. But the world didn't stop turning. The night wasn't done with them, and neither was their story. The weight of what they had been through, the years of separation, the bond they'd both carried alone, it all hung over them like a storm, just waiting to break. Aria couldn't help but feel the pulse of uncertainty, despite the warmth of Rylan's embrace. It was there, lingering, just beneath the surface. "I don't know how we got here," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I know. I know we need each other, Rylan." He didn't answer at first, only pulled her closer, his hand pressing against the small of her back, as though grounding himself in her presence. The night stretched on around them, the forest quiet except for the distant rustling of the wind through the trees. The weight of the moment settled between them, and she could feel the tension building once more. He was still searching for the truth. For himself. For them. And that search, Aria knew, was one that could either bring them closer or tear them apart again. "I never wanted to forget you," Rylan said, his voice rough, barely a breath against her hair. "But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to put everything back together when I don't even understand what happened." Aria closed her eyes, the words sinking deep into her chest. He was so lost. She could feel it in his touch, the desperation in the way his fingers brushed her skin, like he was afraid that he was losing her again. She knew this feeling too well, the ache of losing something that had always been there, the fear of not being enough. But she had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let them fall apart. Not again. "Rylan, you don't have to fix everything," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "We don't need to understand everything right now. We just need to find our way back to each other. We've always been connected. Even when we were apart, the bond never broke." He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes, searching for something, for the truth she had been holding on to all these years. "I've been trying to forget you, Aria. I thought that maybe if I did, it would stop hurting. But it hasn't. And now, everything's different. The raw honesty in his words made her heart ache. She knew the pain he was speaking of. The way it felt to be tethered to someone who wasn't there. The way it felt to carry a love that was never returned. She had spent years hiding that pain, burying it deep inside her, until she couldn't breathe. Until she found herself standing here, with him, facing the truth of what they had both been through. Maybe it's not about forgetting, she whispered. Maybe it's about remembering what's important. What we've always had. Rylan's gaze softened, but there was still uncertainty in his eyes. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe in them, but the weight of the years apart was too much for him to bear. She could see it, in the tension in his jaw, in the way he kept his distance, as if afraid to let go of the fear that had been with him for so long. You've been living in the shadows of what we had, Aria said, stepping closer to him, her voice low and steady. But I'm not that girl anymore. And you're not the man you were. But we're still here. Together. And that's all that matters. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Aria reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it over his heart. The steady beat beneath her palm grounded her, reminding her that they were still here. Still alive. Still connected, even if the path ahead was uncertain. Rylan, she whispered, her voice full of raw emotion. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be with me. Now. We don't have to fix everything right away. We can take this one step at a time. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at her as if he were trying to decide if he could believe in what she was saying. The intensity in his gaze made her pulse race, but she stood her ground, refusing to back down. She wasn't going to let him push her away again. Not when they had come this far. And then, finally, Rylan spoke. His voice was rough, hoarse, but full of something that she hadn't heard in him for so long. I don't know how to love you the way you deserve. But I'll try. For you. A breath caught in Aria's throat, and before she could stop herself, she reached for him, her hands threading through his hair as she pulled him toward her. Their lips met again, but this time, it was different. There was no hesitation, no fear. Just the undeniable need to reconnect, to finally bridge the gap that had been between them for so long. The kiss was slow, deep, and filled with everything they had kept buried for all these years. When they pulled away, the air around them felt charged, like something had shifted. Rylan's hands were still on her, but there was something else now, something softer, something more certain. She could feel it in the way he held her, the way his fingers traced the curve of her back as if memorizing the feel of her against him. Aria, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've always been drawn to you. Always. But I was too afraid to face what that meant. Too afraid of losing myself in you. But now. I don't know. I don't know what this is, but I want to find out. Her heart fluttered in her chest. It was everything she had ever wanted to hear, but hearing it now, when the world still seemed to be falling apart around them, felt like a fragile hope she wasn't sure could survive. But then, maybe that was the point. Maybe the beauty of this moment wasn't about perfection. It was about the rawness. The messiness. The vulnerability of two people who had been through hell and had somehow found their way back to each other. I don't need you to be perfect, Rylan, she whispered, her fingers brushing against his cheek. I just need you to be with me. Now. Let's figure this out together. He closed his eyes for a moment, as though savoring the weight of her words. Then, with a soft sigh, he pulled her closer, his lips brushing against her forehead. "Together," he murmured. "Always." The words were like a promise, and Aria clung to them even as she felt the fear still lurking in the back of her mind. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still obstacles to face, still unanswered questions that hung between them like a fog. But for the first time, she felt like they could face it together. Like they could take on whatever the world threw at them, one step at a time. As the night stretched on, the world around them seemed to fade into the background. It was just the two of them now, standing in the aftermath of everything that had come before, ready to take on whatever was still to come. The road was long, and they didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in years, Aria believed that they could make it. The journey ahead wasn't about fixing the past, it was about embracing what they had now. The love that still lingered between them. The bond that refused to die. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Aria couldn't help but smile. Because in that moment, despite the uncertainty, despite everything they had been through, she knew one thing for sure. They were finally home. Together. And nothing else mattered. The moonlight spilled through the trees like liquid silver, bathing everything in its cold, otherworldly glow. The forest was alive with the sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, but for Aria and Rylan, there was only the beating of their hearts, the air between them thick with something unspoken. Something dangerous. Something that had been building for so long it felt like it might break them both. Rylan stood close, his body a solid presence against hers, and yet there was something in his eyes that unsettled her. Something she couldn't place. His hand was warm against her skin, but his fingers trembled ever so slightly, a telltale sign that, despite the connection they had shared, he was still haunted by what he had lost. By what he could not fully remember. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel grinding underfoot. "I don't know how to fix us." His words sliced through her chest, the truth of them wrapping around her heart like a vice. She had known, deep down, that this moment was coming. That even as they had come together again, there were pieces of their love, of their bond, that were irreparably broken. But it didn't stop the pain. Nothing could. "Rylan," Aria whispered, her fingers pressing against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "We don't need to fix anything. We just need to keep going. Together." He looked down at her, his gaze softening, but there was still that shadow, that uncertainty, hanging over him. Aria knew he didn't fully believe what he was saying. She could feel it in the way his wolf still paced restlessly beneath his skin, urging him to do something, anything, but he wasn't sure what. The tension between them was palpable, and it wasn't just the past they were trying to navigate, it was the future, too. The fear that, despite everything they had fought for, they might still lose each other. She didn't want to think about that. Didn't want to acknowledge the truth that there were still so many things left unsaid, so many things left unhealed. But it didn't matter. Not right now. All that mattered was the moment between them. The present. The way the bond between them pulsed beneath her skin like a steady drumbeat, calling her closer, drawing her in. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was theirs. "I can't lose you again," Rylan muttered, his words a quiet confession, one that shook her to her very core. "I can't go through that again." Her breath hitched at the rawness of his voice. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, her heart swelling with something that felt almost like hope. "I'm right here. And I'm not going to let you go." Rylan's hand cupped her cheek, his touch gentle, but there was a hardness in his eyes, a wariness that had never quite left. The shadow of the past still clung to him, and no matter how much they both wanted to move forward, it was like they were both stuck in a space between memories and the unknown. "Aria," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I wish I could remember. I wish I could remember everything about us. About you. But it's like I'm trapped in someone else's story." The ache in her chest grew, but she swallowed it down, forcing herself to breathe. "You don't need to remember everything," she said, her voice steady. "All you need to remember is that I'm here. And that I choose you. Every day. No matter what." His eyes searched hers, and for a moment, Aria could feel the weight of the years between them pressing down on her shoulders. But then something shifted in him. It was subtle, like a light flickering on in the distance, but she saw it. The way his body seemed to relax, the way his gaze softened. It was enough. It was all she needed. And then, as if the world had been holding its breath, it happened. Rylan leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was slow and tentative at first, but then grew deeper, more urgent, as if they were both trying to reclaim something they had lost. Something that had been broken, but was still worth fighting for. As the kiss deepened, Aria felt something shift inside her. The bond between them flared, stronger than it had ever been, filling her with a warmth that she had almost forgotten existed. Her hands moved to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, and she knew, without a doubt, that despite everything they had been through, despite the pain and the loss, this moment was theirs. They had found their way back to each other. But the world had other plans. The ground beneath them rumbled, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. Aria pulled back, her heart racing, her senses on high alert. Rylan's eyes flashed with alarm as the rumble grew louder, the earth beneath their feet shaking with an intensity that made the trees groan in protest. "What the hell is that?" Rylan demanded, his voice sharp, his body tense. Before Aria could answer, the air around them shifted, and a figure appeared from the shadows, tall, imposing, with eyes that gleamed with the same cold malice that had once threatened to tear them apart. Aria's heart stopped as she recognized the figure, the scent of him reaching her even before the shadows parted fully. It was him. The one who had cast them into this hellish cycle. The one who had pulled them apart and left them to suffer. And now, he was back. "You," Rylan growled, his wolf surging beneath the surface, the tension in his body palpable. "What do you want?" The figure stepped forward, his lips curling into a sneer. "What do I want?" he repeated, his voice thick with derision. "I want what I've always wanted, Thornhart. I want what's mine." Aria felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up as the figure's eyes locked onto hers. There was something familiar about him, something she couldn't quite place, but the instant recognition hit her like a slap in the face. "You're the one," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "You're the one who made this happen. You're the reason." The figure's laugh cut her off, harsh and mocking. "The reason? You think it was me who caused all of this? You think it was my actions that tore you two apart? No, girl. It wasn't me. It was always him." Her mind spun as she tried to process what he was saying. Rylan's face twisted with confusion, but the figure didn't give them time to catch their breath. He stepped forward again, his presence overwhelming, his power radiating from him in waves. "I was the one who was supposed to have her, Thornhart," the figure said, his voice thick with venom. "But fate had other plans. You marked her. And I spent years watching, waiting. Now, I've come to collect what's mine." Rylan's body stiffened beside her, and before she could react, the figure's hand shot out, grabbing Aria by the throat with a strength that made her gasp. Her breath caught in her chest, the pressure building as the world around her began to spin. She reached for his hand, but it was like trying to break free from an iron vice. "Rylan," she managed to gasp, her voice choked, her body shaking with fear. "He's lying." "He's not." The figure's laughter was cold, cutting off her words. "Lying? No, girl. You were never meant to be his. You were mine. And now, I'm taking what's mine." In that moment, Aria's world seemed to tilt. The truth was crashing down on her all at once, a torrent of emotions she couldn't make sense of. The figure, who had he been to her? Why had she felt this strange sense of recognition? And how had he known about their bond, about their love? Before she could answer, Rylan moved with a speed that stole her breath. His body slammed into the figure with the force of a storm, sending him sprawling to the ground. Aria stumbled back, gasping for air, her hands instinctively reaching for Rylan as he stood over the figure, his body taut with fury. "Don't you ever touch her again," Rylan growled, his voice dripping with venom, his wolf fully awake. But the figure only laughed, the sound hollow and mocking as he rose slowly to his feet. "You think you can protect her?" he sneered, his eyes flashing with an unholy light. "You can't even protect yourself." Before Rylan could react, the figure lifted his hand, and the world around them seemed to shudder. The ground cracked open, and with it, something ancient, something dark and primal, erupted from the earth. Aria's eyes widened in horror as the very forest itself seemed to rise against them, twisting and writhing like a living thing. Trees bent at unnatural angles, their branches twisting like skeletal hands reaching for them. And then, in the midst of the chaos, the figure's voice rang out, triumphant, filled with the weight of years of waiting. "It's too late," he said, his eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. "You can never outrun fate. And you will never be free of me." As the earth around them shifted, and the ground cracked open beneath their feet, Aria felt the weight of everything crashing down. They weren't just fighting for their love anymore. They were fighting for their very survival. And as the night exploded into chaos, Aria realized one devastating truth. The fight for their love was only just beginning. The world seemed to shudder and warp as the forest around them erupted into chaos. The ground cracked open with a deafening roar, the trees twisting and contorting as if alive, their once steady forms now bent and thrashing with unnatural force. Aria stumbled back, her heart pounding against her ribs as she clung to Rylan. His body was tense, muscles coiled as he stood protectively in front of her, the weight of the battle pressing down on them both. The figure, he had never revealed his true name, but the darkness in his eyes spoke volumes. Aria could feel his malevolent presence like a physical weight in the air. His power was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a dark energy that thrummed through the very earth beneath their feet. And yet, despite the terror rising in her chest, she couldn't tear her eyes away from him. There was something about the way he moved, something familiar about his power, as if it had always been a part of her, something she had buried deep inside and had never understood. "You think you can stop me?" The figure's voice was smooth, but laced with cruelty, his eyes flashing with an unholy light. "You think your love can save you from this? From me?" Rylan's body tensed, his wolf growling low, a deep sound that vibrated through the air. He stepped forward, pushing Aria further behind him, his chest rising and falling with each measured breath, his eyes locked on the figure with a ferocity she hadn't seen before. The bond between them flared in the air, alive, raw, and desperate, but it was not enough. "Not yet." "Stay back," Rylan murmured to Aria, his voice fierce but laced with something darker, something primal that made her shiver. I won't let him take you. Aria didn't listen. She couldn't. The pull between them, the bond that had tied them together for years, demanded she stand at his side. It had always been her place, by his side, facing the world together. Even if they were torn apart, even if they had lost each other for so long, this was where she was meant to be. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice trembling but unwavering. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm, grounding herself in his presence. We face this together. You're not alone. Rylan's eyes softened for a moment as he looked at her, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw a flicker of something, hope, maybe. But it was quickly replaced by determination, and his gaze returned to the figure, the man who had tried to tear them apart and had failed. The figure's laugh rang through the air, dark and filled with venom. You don't understand, he said, his voice cold. I've been patient, waiting, watching. I know what you are. I know what you've always been. Aria's blood ran cold. His words were laced with a deep, unspoken knowledge, a connection she couldn't comprehend. She looked at Rylan, but his face was unreadable, his features etched with frustration and something deeper, something that almost felt like guilt. What do you mean? Aria asked, stepping closer, her voice barely a whisper. What are you talking about? The figure's lips curled into a smile, but it was anything but reassuring. I was always meant to be with you, Aria. Not him. You've been tangled in this web of fate for too long, and it's time to untangle it. She felt the blood drain from her face as the truth of his words slammed into her like a tidal wave. The bond she had shared with Rylan, was it never meant to be? Had their love been part of some twisted game, something orchestrated by forces beyond them both? But before she could respond, Rylan's voice cut through the haze of confusion and fear that clouded her thoughts. Don't listen to him, Aria, he growled, his eyes now flashing with a dangerous light. He's lying. We've been through too much to let someone like him tear us apart. The figure stepped forward, his hand raised, as if to strike, and for a moment, Aria thought they might both be consumed by whatever dark magic he controlled. But Rylan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, his body moving with a speed and power that left Aria breathless. His wolf surged beneath his skin, pushing him past his human limits, and with one swift movement, he tackled the figure to the ground. Aria watched, heart in her throat, as Rylan pinned the figure, his breath ragged, his fists clenched. The tension between them was palpable, and for a moment, Aria could feel the primal energy crackling in the air like a storm, waiting to break. Rylan, she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Don't do this. He wants you to fight. He wants us to destroy each other. The figure's eyes flared with dark energy as he laughed, the sound echoing in the clearing. You think you can stop this? He taunted, struggling beneath Rylan's grip. You're already too far gone. It's too late for you both. The words hit Aria like a blow to the chest. Too late? Was it really too late for them? Was everything they had fought for, everything they had built together, really just a game? But as she looked at Rylan, she knew that the answer wasn't that simple. The connection they shared wasn't just fate. It wasn't something that could be undone by a single moment. It was something deeper, something eternal. And as much as the figure tried to twist it, she knew in her heart that the love between her and Rylan was real. It was theirs. And no one, not even this dark figure, could take that from them. Rylan, she said again, louder this time, stepping closer, her hand reaching for him. You have to stop. We can't let him win. This isn't us. This isn't who we are. Rylan's body stiffened, and for a moment, the figure's power seemed to pull him back, like an invisible force that threatened to break them apart. But then, Aria reached out, her hands steady and sure, and in that moment, Rylan's eyes softened. The wolf that had surged beneath him receded slightly, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Aria saw the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had marked her, the one who had chosen her. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been fighting the wrong battle. This isn't about defeating him. It's about us. It's about us finding our way back to each other." The figure snarled beneath them, the darkness in his eyes swirling with rage. "You're both fools," he spat. "You think you can overcome fate? You think your love can save you? You'll never be free of me. Never." But Rylan didn't back down. He stood, pulling Aria to her feet, his grip firm but gentle, as if grounding them both in the power of what they had. The connection between them flared again, the bond they had shared, the one that had never truly died, blazing with light, pushing against the dark energy that threatened to consume them. "Fate doesn't control us," Rylan said, his voice a low growl. "We choose our own path. And that includes Aria. I choose her. Now and forever." The figure let out a furious scream as the air around them trembled. But Rylan didn't waver. He stepped forward, his chest rising and falling with the force of his determination, and without hesitation, he extended his hand to Aria. "Together," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Always." And in that moment, Aria knew that no matter what the future held, no matter how many obstacles they had yet to face, they were unstoppable. They had found each other in the darkest of times, and no one, not even this twisted figure, could take that from them. The figure's form began to flicker, his power dissipating in the face of their unity. His presence grew weaker, more insubstantial, until finally, with one last howl of fury, he crumbled into nothingness, the forest falling silent in the wake of his defeat. Aria collapsed into Rylan's arms, her breath shaky with relief, her heart still racing from the battle they had just fought. He held her tightly, his body warm and solid against hers, grounding her in the present moment. The past, the fear, the uncertainty, they were gone. All that remained was them. "I love you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Rylan pressed a kiss to her forehead, his hand running through her hair, his touch gentle and steady. "I love you too. More than you'll ever know." And in that moment, as the world around them began to settle, Aria realized that they had made it through the storm. Together. They had faced darkness. And together, they had emerged into the light. The silence that followed was like a thick blanket, suffocating in its stillness. Aria and Rylan stood together in the quiet aftermath, their breaths coming in ragged gasps, their bodies still trembling from the battle that had just consumed them. The figure, whatever he had been, was gone now, vanished into the ether, his power stripped away in the face of their unbreakable bond. And yet, as the world around them returned to its natural rhythm, the weight of what had happened still lingered, pressing down on them with the intensity of 1,000 storms. Rylan's arms were around her, holding her close, but even now, despite the safety of his embrace, Aria could feel the lingering tension, the unspoken questions that still hovered between them. The battle had been won, but they were far from finished. They had faced the darkness, yes, but the path ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. She could feel it in the way Rylan's body tensed whenever she moved too far away, the subtle shift in his posture as if he were still waiting for something to tear them apart. She could feel it in the way his eyes lingered on her, a flicker of doubt still clouding the depths of his gaze. "Rylan," she whispered, her voice soft, as she pressed her forehead against his chest. "We made it through. We're still here. Together. He didn't respond right away, his arms tightening around her as though afraid she might slip through his fingers. When he spoke, his voice was thick, filled with an emotion she couldn't name. I thought I lost you, he said, his words trembling like fragile glass. I thought I had lost everything. Again. The confession hit Aria like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. What could she say? The fear in his voice was so raw, so real, that it made her heart ache. She had always known how deeply Rylan cared for her, but hearing the vulnerability in his words, the fear of losing her again, made everything feel more fragile than she ever thought possible. You didn't lose me, she said quietly, her hand brushing against his jaw, guiding his face down to meet her gaze. You never did. I'm still here. And I'm not going anywhere. Rylan's eyes softened at her words, but there was still a hesitation in him, a distance that Aria couldn't quite reach. She could see the way he was still holding himself back, the way he was still afraid to let go, to fully embrace the love that had been waiting for them all along. She could see it in the way his lips trembled when he spoke, as if he were holding back 1,000 things he needed to say. I don't know how to do this, Aria, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be the man you need me to be. The words stung, but Aria refused to let them break her. She knew what he was trying to say, he was afraid. Afraid of failing her. Afraid of not being enough. But in that moment, she realized something that made her heart swell with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Rylan wasn't perfect. Neither was she. But together, they were more than enough. You don't need to be perfect, Rylan, she said, her voice steady now, filled with a confidence that had been hard-earned. You just need to be with me. Now. We've been through too much to let fear tear us apart. I need you. I always have. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with meaning, and for a moment, Rylan's eyes darkened with something that could only be described as a mixture of relief and longing. His hand brushed against her cheek, his touch gentle, but firm, as if grounding them both in the present. I don't deserve you, he whispered, his voice cracking as if the weight of the words were too much for him to bear. I don't deserve someone like you. Aria shook her head, her heart aching with the force of what he was saying. She had heard these words before, countless times, words that had been born out of self-doubt and pain. But she wasn't going to let him say them anymore. Don't say that, she whispered fiercely, her hands gripping his shoulders as if to keep him from falling apart. Don't you ever say that again. You are enough. You are everything I've ever needed. You've always been enough. His lips parted as though he were going to argue, to push back against the truth of her words, but before he could speak, Aria pressed her lips to his, silencing him with the force of her love. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, like they were still unsure of each other, still unsure of everything they had been through. But then, as the bond between them flared to life, as the pulse of their connection thrummed in their chests, the kiss deepened, growing stronger, more urgent. When they finally pulled away, breathless and tangled in each other, Rylan's forehead rested against hers, his hands still cupping her face. His eyes searched hers, as if looking for something that only she could give him. Promise me you'll stay, he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet desperation. Promise me you won't leave. The question caught her off guard, and for a moment, she was taken aback by the vulnerability in his voice. But then she realized that, deep down, she had always known the answer. She had always known that no matter what came their way, no matter how many times they were pulled apart, they would always find their way back to each other. I promise, she said softly, her voice filled with certainty. I'm not going anywhere, Rylan. You don't have to be afraid anymore. The words seemed to settle over them like a warm blanket, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Rylan seemed to relax in her arms, his body finally yielding to the weight of the promise she had made. He buried his face in her hair, his arms wrapping around her tighter, as though trying to hold on to the moment, to the truth that they had found each other again. But just as Aria was about to lose herself in the peacefulness of their embrace, a loud crack split the air, a sharp, sudden sound that made them both jump apart. Aria's heart leaped into her throat as she looked around, but the forest was eerily still, the tension in the air thickening with every passing second. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice a little too loud in the heavy silence. Rylan didn't answer at first, his eyes scanning the shadows, his senses sharp. The crack had come from deeper in the woods, and Aria could feel the pull of something dark, something ominous, coming from the direction where the sound had originated. "I don't like this," Rylan muttered, his voice low and tense. "Stay close." Before Aria could say anything, he took her hand, pulling her along as they moved through the trees, the world around them feeling too quiet, too still. The weight of the moment was heavy, pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. Every step she took felt like a step closer to something she couldn't see, something unknown, and the closer they got, the more she could feel the dark presence that hovered just beyond the edge of their vision. They came to a clearing, and that's when she saw it. A figure stood at the center, cloaked in shadow, the faint glimmer of moonlight reflecting off something cold and sharp in their hand. Aria's blood ran cold as the figure turned to face them, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You're too late," the figure said, their voice smooth, but laced with venom. "You think you've won? You think your love can save you?" Rylan stepped forward, his body tense, his wolf threatening to break free beneath his skin. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice full of authority, but there was a flicker of uncertainty there too. "What do you want?" The figure's lips curled into a wicked smile, and in the moonlight, Aria could see the faintest trace of recognition in their eyes. "You already know," the figure said, their tone filled with cruel amusement. "You just don't want to admit it." In that instant, it clicked. This wasn't over. Everything they had fought for, everything they had sacrificed, it wasn't enough. The figure was more than just an enemy. They were a reflection of something darker, something buried deep inside Rylan himself. Something that neither of them could escape. Aria's breath hitched, but before she could say anything, Rylan stepped forward again, his wolf completely unleashed now. The danger was real. And they were both standing in the eye of the storm. But this time, Aria knew. This time, they weren't running. This time, they were ready to face whatever came next. Together. And that was all that mattered. The air between them was thick with the tension of 1,000 unspoken words, but beneath the quiet hum of their shared silence, Aria felt something shift, a flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable. The world around them had been a storm, chaotic and filled with threats that they had barely survived. But in the midst of that storm, here they were, together. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she could feel the weight of their shared past, the broken pieces, falling into place. Rylan stood beside her, his arm gently resting against hers as they watched the rising sun paint the sky with shades of amber and pink. The world, it seemed, had calmed. The dark presence that had stalked them, the figure who had nearly torn them apart, had been vanquished. It wasn't over. It never would be. But in this moment, in the quiet space between the dawn and the chaos of their past, they had found something worth holding on to. They had found each other. Can you believe it? Aria whispered, her voice quiet, almost reverent as she took in the beauty of the morning, the world reborn with the rising sun. She turned to face Rylan, her heart beating faster as she took in the sight of him, his jawline sharp, his eyes still filled with the echoes of everything they had been through, but there was something more now. Something brighter. What? He asked, his voice rough but full of that familiar warmth, the one that made her feel like she was home. This, she said, her hands sweeping out to take in the quiet wilderness around them. Us. After everything. We made it. Rylan's eyes softened as he stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. The connection between them sparked to life again, the bond between them still strong, still alive, pulsing with the force of everything they had endured. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was theirs. I never thought I'd be here, Rylan said, his voice low, filled with something tender, something she hadn't heard from him in so long. I never thought I'd find my way back to you. After all the years apart, after everything we've been through. Aria's heart ached at the rawness in his voice, at the vulnerability he was allowing her to see. For so long, he had kept himself locked away from her, afraid to love, afraid to hope. But now, standing here, in the warmth of the early morning light, she saw a man who had learned to believe in what they had, in what they could still have. Rylan, she whispered, her fingers tightening around his, I've always believed in us. Even when we were apart, even when you couldn't remember me. I knew that what we had, what we still have, is real. It's not about perfection. It's about us, about what we've built together. He looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes searching hers for something he hadn't seen before. Hope. Faith. Something that wasn't broken. I don't deserve you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Aria shook her head, her heart swelling with love for this man who had fought so hard to find his way back to her, despite all the odds. You do. You always have. The words settled between them, grounding them in the quiet strength of their love, and for the first time in a long time, Rylan smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached his eyes. And in that moment, Aria knew. They had made it. They had fought for each other, survived the darkness, and found their way back to the light. Together. But as the sun rose higher, painting the world in gold and amber, Aria felt a sense of unease settle in her chest. She could feel the weight of their past, the pain, the brokenness, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered if it could ever be enough. Could they truly move past everything that had happened? Could they build a future that wasn't haunted by their scars? I want to build something new with you, Rylan said, as if reading her thoughts, his voice steady, his hand cupping her cheek. I want to create a life with you, a future where the past doesn't control us anymore. Aria swallowed hard, her emotions rising to the surface. I want that too. But I'm scared. I don't want to lose you again. I don't want to go back to the way things were. Rylan stepped closer, his forehead resting against hers as he whispered, we don't have to go back. We have the chance to build something new. Something better. And I'm not going anywhere. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth of his words. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. Together. I don't think we can ever go back, she whispered, her voice filled with something fierce, something unyielding. But that's okay. We don't need to. We have each other, and that's enough. The moment between them hung in the air, heavy with promise, with possibility. And then, without a word, Rylan kissed her, slowly, deeply, as though he were trying to pour all of his love, all of his regret, into that one kiss. And she kissed him back with everything she had, with all the love she had carried for so long, the love that had never wavered, never dimmed. When they pulled apart, breathless, Aria's heart was full. And for the first time, she truly understood what it meant to have someone by your side, not as a savior, not as a cure, but as a partner, as someone who would stand beside you through everything. Through the good, through the bad, and through the uncertain. Someone who would choose you, every day. Together, Rylan murmured, his lips brushing against her forehead. Always, Aria whispered back, her heart soaring with the certainty that this time, nothing would tear them apart. The days that followed were full of quiet joy, small, simple moments that felt larger than anything they had ever known. They spent their days in the forest, walking through the trees, side by side, no longer weighed down by the ghosts of the past. Aria found herself laughing again, something she hadn't done in so long, the sound light and free as Rylan teased her in the way he always had. She could see the change in him, the way his posture had relaxed, the way he smiled more freely now, as if the burden he had carried for so long had finally been lifted. And with each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger, deeper. No longer just a memory or a flickering thread between them, it was a living, breathing part of who they were. And when they looked at each other, there was no longer fear, no longer doubt. There was only love. A love that had been forged through trials, through loss, and through the unbreakable determination to never give up on each other. One evening, as they sat together by a fire, the flames dancing in the cool night air, Rylan took her hand, his thumb running over her skin in slow, deliberate movements. He didn't speak at first, but there was something in the way he was looking at her, something that made her heart skip in her chest. "What is it?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper as she leaned into him, the warmth of his body a comforting presence beside her. Rylan turned to face her, his eyes serious but filled with an unspoken promise. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low. "We've been through so much. And I know it's not perfect, but I can't imagine my life without you." Her heart raced at his words, her breath catching in her throat as she met his gaze. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment. Rylan smiled, the most genuine smile she had ever seen on his face, and in that smile, she saw everything, every fear, every joy, every moment they had fought for. He pulled a small box from his pocket, the moonlight catching on its surface, and her breath caught in her throat. "Aria," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build that future we talked about. And I want you to be by my side, forever." With trembling hands, he opened the box, revealing a ring, a simple band, but it shimmered with the promise of everything they had fought for. Everything they had yet to face. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tears welled in Aria's eyes as she looked at the man she had once lost and now found again. The man who had chosen her, who had fought for her, who had loved her through the darkness. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes. Always." And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the quiet whisper of the trees, they knew. They had faced the storm. They had survived. And now, they would write their own story. Together. Forever. The sun rose the next day, and as it bathed the world in light, Aria and Rylan stood hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future had in store. Because no matter what came next, they had each other. And that was all that mattered.